Hello ladies and gentlemen, today in War Thunder we're going to be looking at the Pz.Kpfw 3 Ausf.L, or I'm basically going to be calling it the Panzer 3L just for short because it's easier to say. This thing, at a BR of 3.3, is pretty good, and let's just see the arcade BR. Yes, the arcade BR is 3.3 and the realistic one is 3.3. Basically, in the German tech tree, you get it after the Ausf. Obviously, you have the Panzer III line and the Panzer IV line. Now, there's been a lot of debate that I've seen between this F2 and the Ausf.L, and in this video, I'm going to go through it and see what, in my opinion, which is the better tank. But anyway, looking at the armour, we have 50 at the front, 30 at the sides, and 50 at the back for the turret, so nothing special, actually pretty bad. But the one massive thing about the armour is this little bit of spacing, or spaced armour at the front, which can absorb some damage and obviously try and keep your crew alive. Also, the turret armour is 57 at the front, 30 and 30, sides and back. The hull armour is 50 at the front, 30 at the side, and 50 at the back, but that doesn't take into account sloping. Now obviously at the sides we have a bit of sloping, and I will get into some information like that in a bit with the whole performance testing, just so you can kind of understand how this gun and the armour will work. Also, you have this 50mm Kpfw 39 cannon. Now this is obviously a nice upgrade to have. It is a long barrel compared to the 50mm Kpfw 38 that the Ausf gets, which basically gives you increased muzzle velocity and hopefully a bit more accuracy. It also has these two machine guns here, but obviously in the game that doesn't really matter. Looking at the customization, you basically have this standard camouflage, which is obviously very iconic for the German tanks, and also you have the winter camouflage, which is probably basically only really used in Russia, in the Russian campaign, in the winters over there. But basically this thing, at 53 kilometers an hour is pretty good, but once again, I'll get into stuff like that later. Now, basically, let's see what we have with Germany at this level. You basically have this tank destroyer, the Ausf. Pretty good. And then you also can run into the Hetzer, which can be a bit of a problem. Looking at the Russian side, what you're basically going to be running into is the grueling KV-1 series, the KV-1 L11, and the KV-1 ZIS 5, and also you're going to be running into some T-34s, oh don't we all love those T-34s, and the occasional T-50, just to give him a battering and put him in his place. The Su-122, an interesting machine which I'll make sure to do a review on, you also come up against, so watch out for stuff like that. 3.3 is a pretty volatile area for these tanks, so it is nice to see a tank which is quite interesting to use in that volatile area. Now, ammunition-wise, for your 50mm gun, you have basically this stuff, armor-piercing cap shell. Muzzle velocity is okay, but compared to the APCR rounds, it is nothing really special. Also, you get this high explosive stuff. I would recommend not using that unless you're going after ground targets, obviously, AA and artillery and the such. Basically, what I roll with is this Pz.Kpfw 39, because I believe it does a lot more damage than these APCR rounds. What I find with these APCR rounds is actually they have too much penetration, and they'll put a hole in the tank, but then they'll go straight out to the other side. But once again, we'll get into that in a bit. But basically, I roll with this, the Pz.Kpfw 40/1 instead of the 40, because the 40 at longer ranges actually has less penetration, and with this tank I believe it's better to engage at long ranges compared to getting into the nitty gritty and close combat like you would do with the other Panzer IIIs and the early Panzer IVs. But anyway, let's get on to some arcade battles. So today I have two arcade battles here for you. Basically showing two different methods that I've found works best for the Panzer 3L in this game. Now, the thing about the Panzer 3L is that even though you have this nice gun, even though it has a long barrel, there are certain tanks which you are always going to struggle with, which is why taking at least maybe 10 shots of APCR is good, so you can penetrate them at short ranges. Now, I like to keep a mix. I know a lot of people have been talking about mixing up your ammunition and stuff, but for me, having HE ammo is useless. I don't go after ground targets unless there is literally nothing else for me to do for 10 minutes. I will not go after the AA. That's, to me, left to the aircraft and anti-air, which doesn't want to do anything else, those trucks, the flak panzers. So basically, I take a mixture of the AP ammo, the 39, and the APCR ammo. Now, the AP ammo, I believe, because it is capped, means that it has some kind of high explosive in it. Or at least it seems to. For me, the 39 does more damage, so try and use that as your preliminary shell. Even though you unlock the APCR stuff later, the 39, the first ammo you get, actually has more penetration at long ranges. So, it may actually be worth considering that, because in this tank, in my opinion, it is best to try and get as much range between you and your enemy. There are a lot of Russian tanks and German tanks which can one-shot you in this thing. You do not have a lot of armor. Most things with at close ranges anyway, like the KV-1, the F2s, even the T-34s, you are not going to survive if you are close to them. But if you are further away, you have more chance of penetrating them than they really do of you, because you have that nice sloped armor. You have the nice spaced armor at the front, which can absorb shots like an absolute boss, just like that did. And also, another thing to take into account is when you're driving this thing, don't always feel like you have to be committed to a battle. There is a reason why this thing's top speed is 53 kilometers an hour, and that's not, with any terrain or anything. Down a hill, 60 kilometers an hour, no problem. And also it has one reverse gear, 6 gears going forward, but also one reverse. And that one reverse, I tell you what, like 10 kilometers an hour backwards can get you out of a lot of sticky situations when you need it. It also gives you this ability of ducking in and out of cover, basically like you would on like a game, like a third-person shooter, where you would go up against a wall and then every so often you'd look around it, shoot some bad guys, and then come back. That's how I like to use this tank. Get out of cover, take a shot, get back in. This tank is not... Its armor is not good enough to tank shots. You will get lucky, as I did before, and not take a lot of damage. The tracks don't eat a lot of damage. If you get hit in the tracks, then you are still going to get hit hard. The turret, you always want to be facing the enemy with your turret. Basically, when I'm going anywhere, like if I'm going to a point, or if I am going even across a road, I will point my turret to where I think the enemy is coming from, because if I get shot, I want the shot to hit my turret, because that is where my most armor is. The front of my turret has the most armor. The back and sides of my turret, 30mm. That's not going to do a lot for you. So, just keep that in mind. And your what's it called? Your hull armor isn't great either. Basically, 50mm is not going to stop that much. I mean, at extreme ranges, and by extreme I mean over 500 meters in arcade, then yes, the enemy is going to struggle. Another thing to take into account, as I said before, is the power of the engine. As you saw going up that hill before, it's a very steep incline, and I was able to get up it with no real problem, which is always nice to have in a tank like this. The thing that I believe the main competitor of this tank is, or at least the tank that has given me the most trouble, are the KV-1s. The KV-1s have a hell of a lot of armor, frontally, and side, and back, so penetrating can be a bit of a problem. And it's not a case of shooting them in the right area. You can penetrate them, but it just won't do anything, and as you saw, that KV-1 just tore me apart. It seems like a theme with the German tanks at the moment. It's very easy to hit their ammo and make them go poof. Also, I've had problems with this tank where the horizontal turret drive gets stuck constantly when you get shot. And that may be because basically I'm using my turret to tank damage compared to the rest of my tank. So basically the enemy gets frustrated and shoots my turret and then it gets stuck. But that's obviously easily repairable with the modification of the parts. But it's kind of annoying. There seem to be two general themes I'm finding with the Panzer IIIs and the Panzer IVs right now. Basically, your turret gets stuck horizontally, never vertically. And also, your ammo blows up, no matter where they're shooting you from. Now, there are ways of stopping this, obviously learning where the ammunition is in the tank and making sure that's never exposed. You could do that. The problem with doing that is that, well, you will never get a shot off either. Unfortunately, the ammo in this tank is placed in such a place that basically you have to expose it to shoot if you are ducking around a corner or engaging somebody frontally. You basically have to hope that your armor at the front can save you, and most of the time, unfortunately, it can't, because the ammo is just not good enough. But you can still make a decent impact on the battle. One way I see it is that this tank for me is not an all-out killer. When you look at the F2, the Panzer IV F2, it has that big gun. It's a very big gun, and it's either I believe it's 76mm, it's 75 or 76mm. And basically, what you're trying to do is get into a position with that gun to shoot someone and knock them out in one hit. Because if you don't knock them out in one hit, you kind of have trouble. Your armor isn't good enough. It's basically the same as this armor here. And you can't tank shots, so you're looking to knock it out in one. Unfortunately, with this 50mm, you can't do that. You can't... I've had a lot of points using this tank where I've knocked out loaders, gunners, commanders. I've hit horizontal turrets. I've hit tracks and stuff like that. But I've never one-shotted stuff. It's very hard to, unless you're shooting a tank destroyer and you hit it in its gun mantlet, then sometimes you can knock them out. But generally, it's very hard to one-shot stuff in this, especially when you come up against T-34s and KV-1s in realistic and simulator, but we'll get into that later. In arcade, it's a free-for-all. And I still do well in this tank. I mean, you pick up a few kills here, but mostly you get assists. There have been games where, especially trying to get this task over today, there was one game where I got 2 kills, which wasn't great, and then 8 assists and 0 deaths. So basically what was happening was, I was shooting targets, taking out their gunner, their loader, their commander, their driver, whatever, and then they would retreat, because they would get hit and they would struggle. They wouldn't be able to fire back, they needed to get out of the range of my gun. And then, later on in the battle, or just after, one of my allies would plant a shot straight into them and take them out. Now, a lot of people would find that annoying, but in this tank, I've kind of got used to it. I have just over 100 kills in this tank because I was trying to grind the skin, and I think I have a pretty good idea of it. Obviously, I have all the modifications and everything like that. But of those 100 kills, I would say for every 1 kill, I have about 3 assists. And obviously, it still makes you lines and RP and everything like that, but it's kind of annoying. It makes you wonder, why am I driving this? And it's not to do with my aiming or anything like that. There is a lot of times where I will knock out a gunner, a commander, and a loader all in one shot, and that's not a kill. And that's basically because I don't think the shells of this tank have the power that the F2 has. Now, what it loses in its gun, it gains in maneuverability. One of the greatest strengths of this tank, in my opinion, is the fact that you can do stuff like I'm doing right now. Basically, pop your head up over a ridge, use your turret to basically, try and tank it, and then move back out again. Now, I'm still new at this, and basically, the way you have to do this, you have to understand what you're shooting at, you have to understand how much penetration they have, and if they can blow your bloody head off. It's easy doing this to something like a T-50 with stock ammo. But let's say that T-50 has the upgraded ammo, or let's say there's an Su-122 or a T-34 1942 looking at you. Then you basically have to be a bit more clever, and also there's a bit of a glitch in the game where every time, or sometimes when you shoot, it doesn't seem to fire, but it does, as you saw from the hit registry. Now, this is a prime example of what I was talking about before. I got, 4 or 5 hits into that guy, something like that, and then I got an assist, because I was able to spot him, I was able to hit him multiple times, but I was not able to finish him. And that was not due to where I was shooting him. That was just due to the fact that I do not have the killing power. But as you can see, it's going pretty well. I'm using this tactic to my advantage. I'm using the turret how it is supposed to be used, in a role where basically it can tank the shots. The spaced armor helps so much when doing it. It brushes off shots sometimes. Other times, obviously, not too much. When you're coming up against a Hetzer or an Su-122 with the second modification you get with the ammo, yeah, you're not going to do great. But you can do stuff like this. You can just pick off targets. You can look at them. You can shoot them. And then shit like that happens. Where you get one-shotted. Once again, ammunition exploded. Yeah, as I said, common theme with this tank. But still, the speed, the maneuverability is brilliant. Another thing to add on to that is with this modification, you can get the suspension modification. I was throwing this thing around a lot in the test to see if I could knock the tracks off. It was pretty hard to do. And flipping it as well, even going at high speeds in arcade. But with that suspension upgrade, it makes it near on impossible to rip your tracks off while falling off a hill or something like that. Obviously, you still have to be a bit cautious, but it gives you that extra maneuverability that sometimes you need to get out of situations. Now, basically, what I'm doing here is wrong. I basically know there are a lot of people looking at me, but I know I can guarantee some kills before they hit me. This is what I should have been doing. Should have hit that guy, moved back, reloaded, pushed out again, hit him again, and then moved back. And the thing is, this thing moves very quickly, but also it reloads very quickly, which is another thing to take into account. As you are coming back and popping in and popping out, you have to make sure you do it in time with your shooting. It's kind of basically a rhythm game when you think about it. Another thing you want to take into account, your fat ass is going to get hit a lot if you leave it out to dry, so don't do that. If the enemy has to shoot you, or you are in a position where you must get shot, make sure you get damn well shot in your turret. Now, I feel very sorry for that hit. But it was a good shot, and I think, I did well with the situation. Basically, if you're in a position where you are engaged in close combat with somebody, what you should do is you should get as close as possible to them. And if you're not comfortable that you can penetrate them, such as something like a KV-1, or, the front of maybe some tank destroyers, load APCR. That is what it's there for. APCR has a really, really good penetration when you are close to stuff. At least it has in this tank. Now it looks like this Hetzer is back for vengeance. So what do? I make sure I get into a position where only my turret would be exposed if I went up this ridge. And then, of course, I make a mistake. I have no idea how that Hetzer was able to hit me, but I believe he hit my commander's hatch, which is supposed to be strong, but obviously not. But, yeah. You can still get penned in the turret, obviously. It is only 50, or just, it's about mid-50s penetration-wise. This guy hits me again and knocks out my gunner, doesn't kill him, which is always nice. But basically, in this situation, I'm making sure he can only hit my turret. Because, the worst that could happen is that he knocks out my commander, my gunner, my loader. If he does that, I'm still alive. And the thing is, after he shoots, I take my opportunity. I go around his side, I knock out some of his components, and then I can just sit on his arse and take him out. I don't know if he'd just given up at this point or something like that. Another way of approaching that would have been, once I saw him getting into the position, was rush him straight away. But the thing is, I know the traverse of the Hetzer is good. The Hetzer turns pretty well. So that may not have worked. But anyway, I finish off the dying lamb, which is very sad for all, but had to be done. And now I'm back into the position where I'm able to use my turret to my advantage, which is always nice to see. Now, I do expose myself a little bit more here, but that's basically because the game is ending. I want to take out as many people as possible. And this position on this map is actually really good, because what actually happens is, first of all, it can be a point that you can capture. It can be C point on this map, but also it can be a point where you can look over the main cap, as you can see, and you can take out enemies, which is absolutely wonderful. And for a tank like this, it works really well. For other tanks, maybe not so much. But this tank, with the mobility that you can go forward and backwards very quickly, and you have a great turret traverse in this tank as well. Absolutely wonderful. That's something that you can do very well. And as you can see, I just turn the the turret in time and basically bounce. Well, not bounce, I got hit, but they didn't do any damage to my components. And there's the third. As you can see, this thing's turret is hella good, but sometimes it can let you down, mainly because of that ammunition stuff, and unfortunately I get knocked out. The crew got knocked out by the superior Panzer IV, or the basically maybe a Panzer III actually, but basically the tank that you get after this one. So I got taken out by, well, the tank that was better than mine. But anyway, as you can see, I did pretty well in that match, and that was basically using this thing to its strengths. Not trying to do anything crazy with it, not trying to get into too close quarters, because that's where the armor really fails. But if you have to, you can still compete. It's not a tank which is really good at long ranges or really good at short ranges. It's kind of in the middle with everything. The gun is nice, but getting that killing blow can be very hard to do. But anyway, let's get on to some performance testing. So let's get into some performance testing of this tank, and I'm going to be doing, let's do it live to see how it goes. So first of all, it's time to look up the max speed of this absolute predator, see if it actually is 53 kilometers an hour after all. I tell you what, I found an interesting thing that you can do with the mobile artillery pieces on this game. What you can actually do is point your gun backwards and then shoot. You can actually get up to about 65 kilometers an hour, where it's only supposed to go up to about 40. So that's a little bit of insight for you. It looks like we're slowly getting up to about 48, 49 kilometers an hour. Maybe we can hit the magical 53. As you can see, I am sporting the wonderful winter camouflage, which basically just makes this thing look really bright most of the time, especially when you're looking at the sun. So there's the magical 53 miles an hour. Unfortunately, we won't be going back to the future, but 53 miles an hour is nothing to laugh about, and down a hill you can definitely go faster than that. Now, let's talk about the armor on this thing, and also we'll take some speculative shots at that T-34, and also the other vehicles that you get, such as this bad boy, another T-34, and we'll see where we can penetrate or not. Basically, the armor on this is pretty decent. With the spaced armor at the front, that gives you some extra protection from anything coming at you from the front. Obviously, the sides have terrible armor, and so does the back. So, whenever an enemy is facing you, you should definitely face them. There is no real glancing of shots. What you want to do is try and get this frontal plate here around your gun mantlet shot, or failing that, your upper glacis. Your lower glacis, I haven't really been shot there a lot, so I don't really know how good, or well, it is. What you don't want to do is get shot in the side of this goddamn turret, because, as I've said before, 30mm of absolutely pure terrible protection is not going to do a lot for you. Now, T-34, 50mm tank, as you can see, well, 50mm gun, sorry, as you can see, we're very close range, can plonk one right into the driver's hatch, do a lot of damage. Now let's see. We can also plant one into the side, not doing as much, but we do set on fire and kill it. So, from this range, against probably one of the early T-34s, probably an L11, we can do a lot of damage. Now, we're coming across a T-34 1941, something that you will probably be coming up against quite a lot. Now, let's just plonk one into its side. We can do a lot of damage. See, this thing, when you're attacking stuff from the side, even with just normal ammo, you can do a hell of a lot of damage. The armor-piercing capped shell. Now, unfortunately, taking bigger tanks like this looks like the T-10M to me, but it might not be. But as we can see, you can easily set stuff like T-34s on fire from the side. The problem you will be having is if they're facing you, the only real weakness when you're using this tank is that driver's hatch. So just keep that into account, and just remember they'll be shooting back at you as well. So, here's the big boy. Look at that gun. Absolutely wonderfully massive. A lot bigger than my pea shooter here. But 50mm is nothing to joke about, especially when the muzzle velocity is over 1,000 meters per second when you're using the APCR. Now, let's look at this badass and see where we can penetrate him. So we have a little hatch here, see if we can do anything. Absolutely bugger all. How about the gun mantlet? We got a bit of penetration, but didn't do too much. Now the thing is, we'll never come up against tanks like this, but if you know the armor values of these tanks and their various armors, then you will understand how the gun works from this range. Now what we're going to do is switch to APCR, and we're going to switch to the 40-/1, because that has better penetration. As we can see, we are able to penetrate its side armor, which is always nice to see. And how about the back? So, APCR ammo on this thing. Oh, that was a terrible miss. APCR ammo on this thing, I would definitely say only use it in close engagements, but still be wary of using it, because the thing is, even though APCR gives you a lot more penetration, I found it does a lot less damage, and that's basically because I believe the way the mechanics are working in this game, we've actually killed this guy. Oh my god, there's a KV-2. Oh, there's tons of people, but anyway, we'll leave them for another time. The KV-2 can be penetrated by this thing from the back and the side, so that's something to take into account. There is a moving vehicle over here, a T-34, which is harder to kill, but anyway, as I was saying about something, the APCR seems to hit the targets, but because you're coming up against stuff which has around, 30 to maybe 60 if you're unlucky armor, the shell's going to go straight through that and out the other side, so it's not actually going to do a lot of damage unless it rams straight into the commander. Now, problem areas of this thing, obviously the side of the turret, and also, if you're driving this thing correctly, in my opinion, you should only really be exposing the turret. So, ammo is a big problem. This thing seems to get ammo racked a hell of a lot, creating a lovely explosion, but unfortunately very annoying. That is just one of those things in this tank. High explosive ammo is basically useless to me. Firing on the move is not too bad, but it looks like we did absolutely nothing to him, which is kind of worrying, being a 1941 tank. Now let's see if we can plant another one inside of him. As you can see, firing on the move, not absolutely terrible at low speeds. When you get up to about that 50 kilometers an hour, though, this thing does bounce around a lot. But to be honest, this tank is pretty stable on the move, which is very nice to see, because a lot of other tanks are definitely not. So, as we finish off this T-34, performance-wise, getting up to 53 kilometers an hour, absolutely wonderful. We have tracked this guy, but he's still moving. The armor is unsatisfactory. It's not great, but as long as you make sure that your turret is always facing the enemy, then you should be okay. It's As I said, the spaced armor helps a hell of a lot. Angling is not really going to do you that much, because if they can't shoot you in the front, then they'll just shoot you in the side. And in the side, unfortunately, it's easier to pen you. Your tracks can eat damage, but not too much. And also, as a bonus extra point, the horizontal drive on this thing gets taken out very easily. So that is just something to take into account. I'll get into more of how this gun works, like, what's the word? Velocity-wise in the air, in the simulator battles part. But how about we get on to some historical fact-finding? And after doing some research into the Panzer III Ausf.L, I found some interesting things that might enlighten you about this tank. First of all, in March 1942, a study was undertaken by some German scientists and the German army to determine whether the Panzer IV turret would fit on the Panzer III superstructure. Analysis revealed that the resultant weight was excessive, so basically it couldn't really be done. The reason they wanted to put the Panzer IV turret on the Panzer III chassis is that the Panzer IV could mount that massive gun, which was very, very good against the Russian tanks in 1942, where the summer offensive had started against the Russians. The problem was they weren't able to do it because it was too freaking heavy, so instead they went for the 50mm KWK-39 L/60, basically the one that you see in game. And about 1,100 of them were produced in early in June 1942. Let's see if I can find that over here. Yeah, in 1942, 1,800 Panzer III variants in 1942 were made, or at least available, and then actually which were produced was 2,608. So the majority of them would be the Ausf.L. Obviously, a lot of them could be the other variants, but to my guess, in 1942, you want to have the best gun and the best vehicle that you can, which at the moment was this tank with its turrets. Basically, the improvements that the Ausf.L got from its other variants before it. It got some increased turret armor, which is always nice, from 30mm to 57mm. Obviously, the Germans had come up against the British tanks and the French tanks, which weren't very good, to be quite honest, even though basically the French tanks were actually not bad, but the way the French used them was wrong. They used them more as basically an infantry support unit instead of an out-and-out battle tank, where the British tanks were just not really good enough. When you look at the ones that they used at the start of the Africa operations, I mean, they had 37mm guns on them. You had to get very close to even penetrate these Panzer IIIs and IVs. But basically, it looks like the Germans believed that the Panzer IV's turret was a lot better, but they had to stick with the Panzer III. Another interesting thing is that the Sturmgeschütz 3, which is the first assault gun you get in the game, is actually basically based on the Panzer III chassis. The Panzer III chassis was the basis for the turretless assault gun. So there you go. The Panzer III chassis was actually seen as very good. It was just the turret that was the problem. But basically, as well as adding the extra 27mm of turret armor to the front of the machine, there was also an installation of a torsion bar counterbalance instead of a coil spring for the main gun, and altering the air intake louvres and hatches on the rear deck. And also, all Ausf.Ls had the 20mm spaced armor on the superstructure front, and most had the 20mm spaced armor on the gun. So basically, as you can see on the vehicle in the game, you have like the spaced armor just near and around the machine gunner port and the driver's port, but also the spaced armor on the turret. That's basically what that's talking about. Also, that was basically there to protect against anti-tank rifles and stuff like that. The Russians were very big into their PTRSs, so that was why that was there, to try and stop that. Mainly not for actually tank combat, but just to stop stuff like that. Because the Russian anti-tank guns, or anti-tank rifles, were actually quite good. But anyway, early in the production run, the hull escape hatches on the hull side, and yeah, the loader's vision port on the gun manlet and the turret side ports were deleted. A system designed to transfer heated engine coolant from one vehicle to another was also introduced with the Ausf.L. So that's quite interesting. There's some new basic experimentation there. I'm not really sure it's a great idea to get rid of escape hatches, because obviously tanks were kind of prone to fire. But the Panzers, to be honest, I don't really hear that much about the Panzer III having fire issues. I know it had a bit of engine trouble, but it seemed like that was a common theme with the German tanks. But the loader's vision port on the gun mantlet and the turret side ports were deleted. So basically the only real way of getting out the tank is through the hatch, if you're in the turret. That's what it seems to look like. But the loader's vision port is gone. That's a bit of an odd choice, but obviously I wasn't in control. Also, not just the Germans use these, oh no. The Hungarians, the Spanish, and the Turkish also use them. So that's obviously something to keep in mind. Now, the angles of the armor is an interesting thing that you have to take into account, also in-game, but also in real life. The turret front had 15 degrees of angling on the armor. This is basically the degrees I'm about to list off is the armor angling. So basically, the better the armor angling, usually the better. But we shall see. So turret rear had 12 degrees, turret top had 83 to 90, which is obviously a necessity. The side of the tank had 0 degrees, so that was basically just a flat surface. So if you got hit in the side there, that must have... Well, there's no way that shell can ricochet off. The front of the superstructure, basically the superstructure is the hull in this case, so I'll say hull just, it's easier. The hull front, 9 degrees, hull rear, 17 degrees, and obviously the hull top is 79 to 90 degrees. But yeah, basically there wasn't a lot of armor on the sides of these things. It really was face your enemy tanks. But basically, the real reason why this thing got the upgraded 50mm is because the Germans were worried about the T-34 and KV tanks. So they had to rearm the Panzer III with the 50mm cannon. It was prioritized over everything else, because the thing is, the German guns at that point actually really weren't that good against the T-34s and KVs, no matter what other people say. As it says here, the T-34 was generally invulnerable in frontal engagements with the Panzer III until the 50mm KW-K39 L60 gun, which is the one that we see, was introduced on the Panzer III Ausf.J. So yeah, very interesting, and that's basically the short-barreled one. We're not talking about the one which is on the Ausf.L right now. But the reason it was put on the tank is because it could penetrate the T-34 frontally at ranges under 500 meters, so you have to get pretty close. Against the KV tanks, it was a threat if armed with special high-velocity tungsten rounds. Tungsten rounds, obviously, very, very good. But unfortunately, I don't think we have them in-game at the moment. It would be nice to see them. And here it is, the whole spaced armor debate in 1943 for the Ausf.L. I don't think there is really anything else about this tank which is that good. Obviously, the engine got a bit of tweaking every here and there. But to be honest, the two major big things were the long-barreled 50mm gun, which was used to take T-34s and KVs out, and also that spaced armor at the front. Obviously, it wouldn't help if you got hit at the side. But still, some interesting things to be seen here. Obviously, it was used at the Battle of Kursk. But basically, by the end of the war, the Panzer III had almost no frontline use, and many vehicles had been returned to the factories for conversion into Stug assault guns, which were in high demand due to the defensive warfare style adopted by the German army by then. Now, the great thing about the Panzer III is Blitzkrieg tactics. It would work very well with them, with this great speed and very, very good suspension. It would mean that it could go over rough terrain and be able to still go forward. Obviously, in defensive warfare, Blitzkrieg tactics don't really work too well, so it wasn't really needed. And also, by this point, you had the Panthers, you had the Tigers, so usually the Panzer III was seen as worse than the Panzer IV, so it was better to make some Panzer IVs instead of Panzer IIIs, and that's basically what they did. Very unfortunate for the Panzer III, but, well, technically it was a better design. Technically. Maybe not engine-wise or maneuverability, but hey-ho, the Germans like their big guns and their big armour. But, anyway, after some of that wonderful fact-finding, it is time to get into a realistic battle. So here we are in a realistic battle, where, to be honest, I don't think this machine really shines. The reason I don't think that is at the moment in War Thunder for realistic battles, unless you get the Kursk map, the maps just aren't big enough. This tank relies on its speed, its agility of moving around the map and basically getting a hit on, getting out, going to a different place, setting up, hitting, running, basically stuff like that. And the problem is, these maps are just not big enough or wide enough for stuff like that. There are too many obstacles in the way. There aren't many places where you can keep your speed up and keep going. This tank, even though it has a really good top speed, sometimes it really does struggle getting to that top speed, even with all the upgrades which I have for this thing. Sometimes you can feel sluggish, and also in realistic you have to deal with planes as well. Which can be very annoying, but as you can see, took a hit there, took another hit, still going, no damage, which is always nice. You'll get a lot of instances like that in this tank. But obviously, as I said, in realistic, you have to deal with planes. This thing does not have a lot of armor when it comes to dealing with stuff from the top. That's why in games like World of Tanks, people are really worried about artillery, because if artillery hits slap bang on the back of them on their engine ports, they're really going to struggle. And this thing is definitely like that. Basically, on your back, it's very exposed to anything which is above you. So you've got to watch out for that. And obviously, an IL-2 with its 23mm cannons can easily pierce through 30mm of armor. So, basically, you have to hope that your team is covering you, because there's no way you can defend yourself against aircraft. I mean, technically, aircraft are always going to rule over tanks, and this is obviously the same as in the Panzer III Ausf.L. There is nothing stopping the airplanes absolutely crushing you. But anyway, let's talk about how this thing matches up against its Russian counterparts. With the gun that this has, I've learnt where to shoot a T-34 with it. I've learnt that aiming for stuff like the driver's port, aiming for the side of the turret, even just above the tracks on the back, I know where to shoot them. So dealing with them is not that much of a problem. Sometimes you'll get targets and damage hits over and over again, but that's just the nature of this gun. But sometimes you can do damage like I'm doing now, and basically just keep plopping in shots with a very good reload and take people out. Unfortunately, you get arseholes who decide to take you out in an IL-2, and I wouldn't care if somebody did that. But the fact that that guy has killed me, and the only way he could have killed me is to run into the ground afterwards. Fuck him. If you do that, I'm sorry, I hate you. If you are so willing to get a kill that you will trash your aircraft, that is just absolutely ridiculous to me. But anyway, on to the matter at hand, as I was talking about. The T-34s in this thing you can easily deal with. You have enough armor penetration, and even if you don't, the APCR is good enough. The great thing about it, as I said, the speed, you can flank stuff. If you're in a squad, I've found being in a squad with this thing, and maybe being squadded up with a Panzer IV F2, or something like that, is a really good idea, because basically you can go forward and scout, and then you can use your tank destroyers or your F2, your big guns, to take out people. Which is why I get a lot of assists in this game. And which is why I think you should get Silver Lions for spotting, to be honest. But that's another thing for another time. Basically, at the moment, as you can see, I'm staring at a rock, seeing fire going off at it, but there's actually nobody around there, so I have no idea what the hell's going on. So that's a bit of a blunder, as you can see, but the way I'm angled here, as you can see, I'm behind these rocks at the front, I have stuff covering my back, and I basically only really have my turret exposed. Yes, I am at an angle where if a shot comes in, it will hit me from... it will basically probably always go in because I'm angled downwards, so the shot will hit me. I'm not angled upwards, so the shot won't ricochet. But with this sloped armor, I was hoping that I would be alright. And the thing is, we're kind of in a precarious position here, because my team, basically we have to make sacrifices. We've been dominated by the air, and basically the ground units on their team haven't really done an awesome job, but they have taken the hill, and this map is all about that hill. If you take the hill, you have basically won this map, so we have to somehow get up that hill. Now the thing is, there are two ways of going about it. I could go up that hill and get straight out murdered straight away, because the thing is, even if I turn my turret to the right, I'm exposing my hull. And that's exactly what you don't want to do in this tank, because you do not have the armor to do that. You are not a KV-1. The KV-1 is a machine which pisses me off day in, day out. Not because it is not historically accurate, but because there is a fundamental problem with the machine. And that is the fact that the KV-1 is much better than this machine, and also I believe the early versions of the Panzer IV and the Panzer III, but it comes up against them. The reason the KV-1 wasn't that competitive in World War II is because of the crews manning it. They were very inexperienced and they didn't really know what they were doing, compared to the German crews, who by that point in the war were battle hardened. So, in this game, that is obviously not simulated. The main problem with this tank is that dealing with KV-1s is very tough. Okay, in realistic, if people are driving KV-1s, there isn't much you can do. You can try and fight them head on. You will lose, because you cannot penetrate them. You can get very close to them, use your APCR, and put shot after shot into them, and it won't do a damn thing. It'll take out a commander, a gunner, and stuff like that, but the KV-1 will survive. Basically, what you have to do if you come up against the KV-1 in this thing is outflank it, hope that its turret traverse is not as fast as you are going, use your momentum to swing around and hit it between its turret and its hull, or just hit it on its arse and see what's happened. It's basically like what Oddball said in Kelly's Heroes, if you've ever seen that. He says, "The tiger has only one weakness, its ass." And basically that's the same for the KV-1. And unfortunately I do make a rash decision here because I have to go forward. We are losing this battle. And as you can see, they've taken the hill here. And there's not much we can do about it. Yeah, I can kill people, but meh, like it's not going to do a lot. And here we go, the KV-1. As we can see, I penetrated it. I didn't do anything to it, and he just absolutely wrecks me. Because ammunition and crew struggle, and he's also firing down at me, which is never good. But yeah, so basically to sum up in realistic, even though you're not as fast as you are in arcade, you can still use that speed and your maneuverability to your advantage. Also, you have to use that method of ducking in and ducking out of cover. If you feel like people are zeroed in on you, just move. That's all you have to do. It's not hard to do. Just move to the next rock, or move back. Make sure that you have support around you, which is another thing. This tank does not do well on its own. As I said, there is a reason why this thing gets a lot of assists, because you should spot for people. You should take shots, but try and take out loaders and gunners and commanders. Going for kill shots isn't really going to work. Even going for that T-34 driver's hatch, the best you're going to maybe do if you're lucky is hit the ammo, but most of the time just take out the driver. So in realistic battles, kind of use yourself as a scout. You have the speed, you have the turret traverse, you have the armor penetration. You can do stuff like that. And if you don't want to do that, you can hand back and use that 50mm to ping people all day long. Do some damage, maybe take out some of them, but you're not going to do that much for your team, which is the main thing in my opinion. Teamwork always wins battles. But anyway, let's get on to some simulator battles. And so here we find ourselves on Kursk in a simulator battle, which is always nice to see. Kursk at the moment is a map which in my opinion I hope Gaijin use as basically a way to go forward. The idea of having AI everywhere. The idea of having this actual battle scenario. Even though this place doesn't really resemble what the fighting at Kursk was, it's still nice to have, and I'm guessing parts of the Battle of Kursk were actually like this. So even if it doesn't resemble the whole scope of the battle, it's still nice to have. But anyway, back to this tank. Now, there's a problem I have with this tank, which is a problem which gets worse and worse as we go from arcade to realistic to simulator. And the fact is, it's acceleration. In arcade, you can beast around the place, use yourself as a spotter, basically go from point to point and really make a crucial contribution to the battle, because basically what you can do is you can, what's the word? You can be in the place where you are supposed to be when you need to be, if that makes sense. Basically, if your allies need help, you can go and support them because you have that 50 kilometers an hour. Now, in realistic, the acceleration gets worse, but you can still do that. You can still get around the place. You can still duck in from cover and duck out, and when you need to. In simulator, good luck with that. This thing's acceleration isn't great unless you're going down a hill, which obviously you can only do half the time if you're in a very hilly area. And if you're not, you are really going to struggle with getting that speed up at the start of a battle to get into key positions. Now let's just talk about where I'm going right here, because a lot of people will say, oh, why aren't you going over the east where everybody else goes? Right, with this tank, the Panzer III Ausf.L, I need to try and trick the enemy. The thing is, if I come up against a KV-1 on that side, please tell me, enlighten me, what do I do? I could try and flank it. Good. Okay, very good answer. What if that KV-1 isn't alone? What if he has a T-34 with him? And on that flank, we basically have the Panzer IVs, the Ausf.F2s. So I'm pretty sure they can handle myself. They can handle the enemy. No, they can obviously handle myself, but you know. So basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to get into a position where the enemy don't usually look for tanks, and the idea is to get flanking shots off. Now, this could massively backfire on me, because this could mean that the enemy sees me and plants shot after shot until I'm dead, because I'm isolated. But this is a risk-taking tank. It is not a tank where basically you can just do what you can do in the Ausf.F2. Now, let's have a talk. I did say I'd talk about it, so why not now? While this simulator battle is going on, you can obviously see from the screen what's going on. Not much has really happened yet. There is a KV-1 being an arsehole, but hey ho, he's a KV-1. They're allowed to be. So, comparing this machine to the Panzer IV Ausf.F2. To me, there are some few differences which make one better or the other better depending on where you're coming from. So basically, the Ausf.F2 has undoubtedly a better gun. And by better gun, I mean it has better penetration. But that's great in arcade, because you have that indicator. But if you actually look further into the F2, you realise that its main gun, or its main ammo it uses, has a muzzle velocity of 740, then its heat rounds has 450 meters per second, and then its APCR has about 930. So, if you want to fire those heat rounds, or the normal rounds, in realistic or simulator, you're really going to have to learn how to properly guide your shots, especially with those heat rounds. With the Panzer III Ausf.L, basically your standard ammo has 835 meters per second muzzle velocity, and your APCR has 1140 or 1180. So, aiming in this thing is a lot easier. So maybe for people who aren't as confident in the game at being able to arc your shots, or just not wanting to take the chance of missing with that big gun, with those big rounds, then you should take this. Now let's talk about other things that the Ausf.L does better than the Ausf.F2. By the way, its BR is 0.3 above it, so most of the time you're going to get into games with it. And it seems like people at the moment are preferring the Ausf.F2. And that kind of worries me. For certain reasons, which I won't get into. But anyway, this thing is a whole 10 kilometers faster in max speed. That means this thing is a hell of a lot more maneuverable, and that's something you really... If you're a player like me who likes to get into positions where you can really use your tank to its full advantages, instead of just sitting at the back of the battlefield and shooting things, then, you know, it's really, really good, to be honest. But if you're one of those guys who likes to use a tank as an assault gun, then there's no point in using the Ausf.L. The Ausf.F2 has the same turret rotation, so you don't really have to worry about that, but it doesn't have as much armor, and it also doesn't have the spaced armor. So the Ausf.L is basically, in a way, a brawler tank compared to the Ausf.F2. I'm not saying the Ausf.L is a brawler tank, but the way I see it is, if you're in realistic or simulator, the way you should use this tank, as I said before, is kind of as a scout, to see where the enemy are, and then let your big boys, or the big guns, really take a few pot shots. Now, that doesn't mean that your gun is useless. No, your gun is wonderful against T-34s and T-50s. But against those goddamn KV-1s, which I've had a hell of a lot of trouble with, unless you get a lucky shot or you get close with the APCR rounds, you really have to rely on those big boys helping you out. Obviously, other things with Germany at the moment, you have the Jag, what is it? You have the Hetzer, which is always good, around this at 3.7, and the Stug 3 Ausf.F, yes. And they can basically help you out as well. And at this level, the Germans don't really have a decent light / medium tank, which I would class as a scout tank. So maybe this is the answer. I mean, you can get into positions where you can see the enemy, you can go hull down, which is always nice in a tank like this. And to be honest, 50mm gun versus a 75mm, it's sometimes going to win out, but in this case it really doesn't. And your armor isn't really that good enough to be able to brawl with tanks. Now, as we see in the main field, back to the video, I am just shooting at AI, and basically just testing with this gun, and let's see what I see. What's that? Box head? Of course, it's the KV-1. So I take some tester shots to see where I'm at, and as you can see, I'm actually overfiring this thing, because I'm actually used to the Stug 3, which has a very low muzzle velocity compared to this. So, as you can see, it is great using this gun because you can actually fire straight instead of having to arc everything, which can get very, very annoying, especially in realistic. But you see the problems this gun is having. I have the full side of a KV-1 at maybe, I don't know, 500, maybe 500 to 1,000 meters, and I can't do anything to it, even with APCR at this range. I can't penetrate this guy. Like, I've hit him a few times, but it hasn't done anything. And I've spotted it for my allies, and they have to take him out. And luckily they do. So, the way I see it is the Ausf.F2, the Panzer IV, is designed to take out KV-1s with its 75mm. And if you're unlucky to be able to go up against a KV-1 in this thing, yeah, you can take it out. But you should focus on, in realistic and simulator, on T-34s, because you can do shit like that. And just basically pulverize your enemies. As you can see, I've basically wrecked that other player. I knew he was another player, basically because of his skin that he had. It was very blue, which isn't usual on a T-34. But yeah, shooting the side of a T-34 with this thing, you'll most always penetrate, and as talked about in the performance testing, if you are shooting a T-34, look, if you are close enough, look for that look for that driver's hatch, or the driver's peephole. That is a real weak spot, and can get basically taken out by anything. And the thing is, if you kill a driver, killing the driver is always good. Now, you can see the problems you can have with the Panzer III right now. Because that shot didn't hit my spaced armour, basically my whole crew inside shit themselves. And, well, basically half of them got knocked out there. So that's something to take into account. As I said before, keep your turret aimed at the enemy. The problem with that is, if you have two enemies, then, you know, stuff's gonna go wrong. So maybe this is a tank that can only be really used in teamwork situations. Like, because basically when you think about it, even going back to the Battle of Kursk, I watched a very good documentary on it recently, on the Battlefield documentary series. Basically, the way they did it was they put Tigers in the centre of the columns, or the central front, Panthers flanking them, and then in the centre they put the Panzer IIIs and the Panzer IVs. So basically the Tigers would take the brunt of the hits, and the Panthers would take the rest, and then the Panzer IIIs and IVs were able to be protected and still give basic fire. So maybe you have to employ tactics like that with this thing, but instead of a Tiger being at the front, you are going to be at the front. And you have to be skilled enough as a tank driver to basically not get hit and to spot the enemy for your team. Now, as you can see, we've taken out all of the AI, and there is only players left. So we know where people are, and that was a very, very good shot from that guy, or very lucky. You know, it may have been very lucky, but if it wasn't, very good shot. Well done, sir. And another point to bring up is the same thing I was talking about in Arcade and Realistic. I put some very good shots in that T-34, hitting the side of his turret, and only knocking out a loader and a gunner, and doing some minor damage to some other stuff. So, this thing is still a support tank in that way. It's still an assist tank. This isn't an outright killer. You're not going to get the fancy explosions you do with certain tanks in this game. You're not going to get the one-shot kills. This is a grinder. This is a, come at me bro, I have a gun, you have a gun, let's tango. Basically, you have to use a bit of skill, which, if you don't want to use a bit of skill, that's fine with me. Go and play the F2. The F2 has a very good gun, and it can basically one-shot anything in arcade, as long as you know where to aim. This thing, not so much. I tell you what, as a beginner's tank, it may be worth using this thing in a beginner's way, because this gun isn't that powerful. It teaches you how to look for weak spots on tanks which are, well, betterly armoured than your own. And it also teaches you the value of APCR and artillery and definitely fire extinguishers. This thing is prone to fire if hit in the right place, just as it's prone to goddamn ammo problems. But maybe that'll be the good thing for it. And also, it is the tank before you start getting some of the big boys, like the Tiger. I mean, first of all, you get the Panzer III Ausf.M, which is actually pretty decent, but then you get the Tiger. So maybe this is a good tank to learn and to understand where to shoot tanks, where are they weak, and where to hit them. I never really thought about that. But anyway, back to the simulator battle. We've basically dominated this. To be fair to the enemy team, they didn't do great, but you know, it happens. Supposedly the Germans are better at this tier. I completely disagree. That KV-1, or the two KV-1s, are beasts. And to be honest, that's the one problem with the Panzer III, the KV-1. I know it's weird to say, but the Su-122 gets flattened by this thing. The speed, the rotation, the gun on this thing destroys the tank destroyer, the Su-122. You can take out a T-34 without that much issue. They're basically on equal terms with a T-34, this thing. Against any German things, all the Germans have weaknesses one way or another. The F2, the side of the turret, the side of the tank, the back of the tank, anything which isn't the front. Same with this one. And then you get stuff like the assault guns, where they have very weak gun mantlets, or they have very weak lower glacis, or they have very weak tracks, and then you can just go around them. Like, everything has a weakness to this tank, which is wonderful. And because of the speed and the rotation and the gun power of this tank, it means that you can use it in ways like that. I would love to try this as a flanking tank. I think it would be great as a flanking tank, especially in simulator. It would be absolutely grand. But I haven't got that opportunity yet, and the thing is getting a kill before the enemy kills you. That is going to be a struggle, especially against something like a KV-1. But as we saw in that battle, to be honest, I didn't sway the battle, because in simulator, in this tank, you're not really going to. It's a tough tank to swing the tide of the battle. It's not something that you can really change. But still, put the gun to work, got a few AI kills, got some very good hits on that T-34, and proved how annoying it is taking on a KV-1 in this thing, which is always an issue. But as we can see, got a lot of research for some reason, and the stats, well, they don't tell the full story, but they do show how dominant my team was. So anyway, on to the final verdict. So here we are at the final verdict, where I'll be giving my opinions on the strengths and weaknesses I believe the Panzer III Ausf.L has. So let's get to the strengths. This tank is fast, which makes it great for performing flanking maneuvers and ducking in and out of cover. The ducking in and out of cover, I think, is a lot more important than the flanking maneuvers. It makes you able to basically shoot the enemy without them really getting an effective shot on you. The flanking maneuvers obviously are very useful as long as you're in a squad or something like that. The muzzle velocity is very high, meaning that it is easier in realistic and simulator to be accurate. This is a thing that I think is undervalued by a lot of players. The fact that you don't really have to arc shots and you can basically just blow a hole straight into things is really nice, and you don't really have to worry about angles or the way the shell will travel. The APCR rounds mean that if you get stuck in a close fight, you will have the penetration needed to put a hole in any tank at your level. That is always nice to have, basically a fail-safe. Even though the APCR I wish worked better at longer ranges, it doesn't. But under 500 meters, you will be able to really, really hurt whatever is coming at you. The turret eats shots, and the spaced armor can save you from certain death at points. It also makes going hull down a great option in this tank. As long as you have your gun facing the enemy, and you are hull down, you're in a great spot. It's always nice to be in that position in this tank. It seems to work very, very well. With a good turret traverse, it is easier to outflank tank destroyers and slower tanks such as the KV-1. This can be your failsafe. There's a lot of times where big scary tanks are looking at me, or a tank destroyer is looking in my general direction, and because of the speed and because of everything like that, I'm able to get around the tank. But even more worth than that is basically the turret traverse, because that means you can keep your turret aimed at them while you're going around. So if they're able to turn with you, they still hit your turret, which is very, very useful when that is where all of your armor is, on the front of the turret. But anyway, let's get on to these weaknesses. Your armor is only strong when facing the enemy. If you get flanked or attacked by two enemies, you are as good as dead. This is a big problem when you only have 30mm of side turret armor, or even side armor on the hull. You really have to keep your wits about you. Look at the map all the time if you're not supported by allies, and just, keep your wits about you. But if two people come at you, you are really going to struggle. There isn't much you can do except maybe use that speed to your advantage. The horizontal drive gets knocked out so often, it may as well just be an assault gun, and repairing it can take a long time. This is a thing that's happened quite a lot to me, where basically I'm in the middle of a dogfight. Not a dogfight, but you know what I mean, a close quarters fight. And I'm hitting, and I'm doing damage, I'm taking out components, the commander's dead, and then, bang, horizontal drive gone. It's a problem that seems to run through the Panzer line, and I hope, if it is historically accurate, then okay, but if it isn't, I hope it gets fixed. You cannot successfully penetrate a tank from a range of 500 meters consistently. As you saw with that KV-1, even though I was looking at its side, even though I was using very good penetrating shots, the only thing I could really penetrate was its tracks and its suspension. So, against tanks like that, you are going to struggle in this tank. There's no way around it, and maybe the F2 is a better option for stuff like that. At long ranges, you are not very effective, so getting up close and personal is a good idea, which may not suit all players. As I said before, it may be worth using this thing as a scout, spotting enemy TDs, because using that speed to your advantage, making sure you use momentum to get around and hit stuff. That may be a great idea, but I know that play does not suit everybody, so that could be an issue. Your ammunition store is like a ticking time bomb, only needing your loader to pick up the wrong shell and it will go off. The ammunition on this goddamn tank is so volatile. I would guarantee that half the times you die is because you get ammo racked, or your ammo explodes. So you gotta watch out for stuff like that. And it takes away from the whole hull down thing, because even if you get hit in the turret, you still can get ammo racked quite easily. But, that happens. Every tank has its weaknesses. But anyway, the Panzer III Ausf.L. What do I think about it? I like it. I really do. I love the fact it has great speed. I love the fact that its turret traverse is good, and you can still pen stuff consistently, which is always nice. Comparing it to the Panzer IV Ausf.F2, I'm going to have to think about that a bit more. I'll probably talk about it a bit next week. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review, and thank you for watching, and have a great day.